You are listening to Not on the Payroll right here at notonthepayroll.com. You can check us out on Facebook, check us out on YouTube. Also, check us out on Rumble. We have the privilege of sitting down with State Representative James White. He is we wanted to sit down with him today and discuss some of the details behind property tax, how it works, just really the process from beginning to end. James, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, man, to help maybe shed some light to this big issue on property tax.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. We're always glad to be on with you and in front of all the constituents that we're extremely proud and honored to represent.
Well, I tell you what, just to dig off into this property tax topic, man, why do we even have property tax? Why? I mean, what's the reason behind it?
Well, I think property taxes are a vestige or legacy from this state's founding. Okay. When we were primarily an agricultural state. But we have to understand this. Local taxing jurisdictions, whether they be counties, cities, school districts, water districts, hospital districts, in your government class, we often said that those were creatures of the government, creatures of the state government, meaning that they are a creation of the state government. And understanding that the people create those agencies, or those local jurisdictions, Jay, and those local jurisdictions need funding in order to do their specific or general purposes. The state constitution, which is ratified by the people of Texas, when it is changed by a majority of the voters that show up and vote. The state property tax is, property taxes, they are in the state constitution.
Okay.
And give the local jurisdictions the discretion to levy a property tax.
Okay. Do you have any?
I've got my opinion on that type of tax revenue system, and we can talk about that. But it's in the state constitution, and understand, to change the state constitution, you just can't have a simple majority in the Texas House and Senate. You have to have a supermajority of 2/3 in both chambers. That would be 100 out of 150 members in the Texas House and 21 out of 31 members in the Texas Senate. Okay,
so let me ask you this, because here a few weeks ago we had on some folks from Eliminate Property Tax here locally, and I guess my question would be, obviously there's a push, I think, from kind of the theory that's pushing what they're doing is going over, removing, I think, 60 taxes plus, that includes fees and stuff like that, and coming back in with a consumption tax. Just from a reality standpoint, though, not saying that's not rational or anything, because we have yet to talk to the economists. I'd like to see kind of the breakdown, but just from your vantage point, how reasonable, or maybe not reasonable, but how effective do you think that cause is in both the House and the Senate if they have to? I mean, if it was to go to vote, because I mean, honestly, you actually proposed something, or I mean, here recently, or in the past couple of years, right? Specific to eliminating property tax, right?
Well, this is what I think. I don't think the votes are there. Again, to change the Constitution,
right,
you've got to have 100 votes, and it doesn't matter which party they're from. I'm just saying, you got to have 100 votes in the House,
right?
Yeah, 21 in the Senate.
Okay.
Let me just lay this right here before we get into the academic stuff. we just finished celebrating our independence. Okay. Right. And we know that phrase that contains those three phrases that, just ring in our heads all the time: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's the thought that the pursuit of happiness, according to Jefferson, was being able to own property. Okay.
Wasn't that actually the first rendering of that statement?
Yes, it was the first rendering. Okay. And the idea is that these are inalienable rights, meaning that they come from God, they come from our Creator, they come from our King. We would probably say Lord Jesus Christ. Okay. All right. And the best that government can do is to protect those rights. Okay. They can't even give them to you. Government can't give you something that the Lord has already given to you. Okay. Sure. So saying that, I do think the property tax assessment, especially the way we're doing it today, is inconsistent with that theme. All right. Okay. So now let's get to some of the academics that you want to get into. You can open up any type of economics textbook, right? Right. School, college, postdoctoral, whatever. Okay. And there are a few principles to a tax system, regardless of what it is: sales tax, property tax, flat tax, whatever you want to call it. First, it has to generate the income or the revenue that it's supposed to generate, right? Right. Say that it has to be simplistic or simplified. Let's say it that way. You want it to be transparent, right? You want it to be efficient. All right. If I haven't said it already, you want it to be fair. Okay. Now, obviously, the trade-offs from system to system. So one may be more efficient, but maybe not necessarily fair. Okay. Or let's say it that way. So saying that, Jay, I think in 2022, in the 21st century, this is not 1822, and it's definitely not 1922. I do think overall our state tax system and our national tax system, our federal taxes, right? We do need to look at those and overhaul those to make them more prevalent to the 21st century, because most of us do not use our land today as we used it 100 years ago or 150 years ago, where you were, you had 50 acres, you were growing cotton. Okay. Right. And pretty much when the appraiser came by to value your land, he appraised it by what? What's the value of cotton today? Right. Okay. And there was some computation, and that was your property tax. Well, today you may have a coffee shop. Okay. Or you may have your residential home. You may have a body shop. And so we're in a different type of economic environment, probably a little bit more complex than back in the day, right? And I think we do need to overhaul our tax system overall to bring it up to a 21st century standard.
So at one point there actually was a state property tax, am I right?
Yes. And so this is what I would tell people. It's the principles, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And then you've got the theory, right? And then you've got practicality. All right. So if someone said, well, Jane, can we get rid of the property tax? To say no would defy history. At one time, for a long time, the state had a state property tax system. Okay. And history tells me that it was quite inefficient, wasn't evenly, applied, just had a lot of problems with it. Yeah. And the legislature, again, on a 2/3 majority, sent to the people a constitutional resolution to abolish the state property tax system. Okay. over time, which resulted in some increases in the state sales tax to make up that state revenue loss. So you see where I'm going here, right?
Right.
And that constitutional amendment, I think it gave the state legislature like 10 years to make that transition. And so we did that. So can we eliminate at least some of the property taxes in this state? Yes. I think others would be more problematic, not necessarily undoable.
Okay. So specific to appraisals, everybody, including myself, I mean,
Myself.
My appraisal value went up this year.
Okay.
But
hey, let me just weigh in on that a little bit.
Okay.
Whether it's, I've heard, I'll travel the state. Obviously, I'll travel the district. We'll talk to small businessmen and women. We'll talk to realtors. We'll talk to homeowners. We talk to business, everybody, right? To the extent that it is, I'm not going to just blow smoke at people.
Right.
I'm not going to get very cryptic on where to blow it, but I'm not going to blow smoke to people and say that in Texas, because of our population growth and throughout the country, because of maybe inflationary pressures, supply chain disruptions, we can talk about how that's impacting the stuff, right? The values. I'm not going to come up and tell people, oh, no, your value shouldn't be increasing. Now, we can sit down and say it shouldn't be going up 50% or 80%. Okay.
Sure.
But there's no doubt that due to some of those factors that I've listed, there are pressures, there valuation increase pressures. Okay. So the idea is that if more people are rapidly moving into the state, right, then we have housing stock of, readily available. That's going to, have an upward increase in valuations.
Sure.
That is prices of housing stock. When you add in certain supply chain disruptions that we've experienced due to COVID, the bill property, the bill land, okay? I'm just occasionally looking back at my dog because he's looking at me. Okay.
No worries.
Whether it's the cost of supplies to build buildings, right? Supply chain disruptions have increased the cost of those items. That's increasing the cost of buildings and housing stocks, which is having an impact on valuations and the prices thereof. And then you just got this inflationary stuff, whether it's the U.S. Federal Reserve overprinting money, okay, supply not necessarily catching up with demand after these COVID unconstitutional lockdowns. All right, so all of those it's a imperfect, I would say, perfect storm.
Okay.
Where you have this so I can look at my district from the lakes on Alaska in Polk County to the lakes of Sam Rayburn. All right. To actual timber tracts. All right. To residential. I mean, I've got in our district, we have a very diverse property, look, right?
There's a lot of different types of property. You got your single family dwellings to investment properties to major tracts of property.
Lake property, which for a lot of reasons, tends to at times value more because people like the idea of looking like I'm looking at a lake now, right? Yeah. Like the idea of that and what that brings with it. So I talk to guys, a lot of guys that just cut timber,
Right.
and they'll have somebody drive up behind them. When they're trying to make their decision, do they replant? Do they cut this up in the sections? Man, they'll have folks that'll drive up with a checkbook from Houston or Dallas.
Yeah.
And just write it for $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 an acre, dude.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I could see it on both sides, right? It's
Sure.
impacting values, right? But if you're selling out your property in Dallas or Houston and you're retiring from Exxon Mobil, or and that little lot they had in Houston, now quarter lot with a house, they sell that and they got $650,000. Yeah, they'll come here per acre and spend $10,000, $15,000, $17,000, but they can buy that. They can buy a lot of acres, a lot of space, buy a lot of house, and still have a considerable amount left over from their sale in Houston.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a lot of that going on. But then what are we hearing now? The Fed is trying to catch that dog called inflation. And so they're raising rates. And now the point will be, will that bring about some type of property valuation crash?
Yeah.
And we'll.
So if I recall correctly,
Mm-hmm.
I remember, because for me, to be honest with you, my exposure to property tax up until earlier in June, back at the beginning of June, I guess, whenever we had the eliminate property tax people on, my exposure to property tax and basically all the gears of the thing, was quite simply just cutting a check to the property tax people every year. And so I had never really done any kind of deep dive into this process. And so, I've talked to a lot of different people, and I'm just trying to kind of educate myself to be able to try to help educate the public. In no way am I what I would consider some sort of authority on the issue. But in some of my talks, it was told to me that there used to be that, because I was asking, why do we have an appraisal district? And I was told that, before it was broken up. And so it was not broken up, but it was like multiple entities were kind of doing their thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, now I guess, how do we get from point A to point B? How do we get from schools and your emergency management people and county and all that stuff? How do we get from there to an appraisal district, though?
Well, another East Texan. I believe he was out of Orange County by the name of Pivito, last name of Pivito. Pivito was a state. It was the idea that you had all these different taxing entities that had their appraisal office, and they were all appraising property. And kind of like when you did a protest or you wanted to talk about your value, okay, you went to each one. You had to go to all these offices to do it. So he had this property tax reform bill. I think it's still known as the Pivito bill. And what it did, it combined that appraisal function. One of the things it did, it combined that appraisal function into one appraisal district, which encompassed, that one county. So some people would say it streamlined the appraisal process. Some people say it probably consolidated.
Okay.
Appraisal process. But the fact of the matter is, we because of that legislation, we went to one appraisal district for the entire county.
Did the people have any vote in that?
Say again?
Did the people have any vote in that?
I believe there was some constitutional amendments in order for that to go into effect.
Okay. Okay. So at some point, the people would have had to.
But what we do know, to get that legislation moving, it did take a majority of the members
representation.
Right.
Okay. So basically, streamlined versus consolidated. So that's kind of the that's kind of the talk at this point.
Consolidation comes with power, right? And streamline comes with efficiency, and we don't know. And I think that goes back to some of the principles of taxation, right? You may get some efficiency, okay, but does that efficiency lead to some consolidation? Does that efficiency actually become not efficient? Okay,
sure.
And definitely we need to look at going forward.
So how to, just from your vantage point, now I understand you're a state representative and you're not chief of the appraisal district. I get that. But just in your handlings and your dealings with people, what's kind of the method of handling disputes? Because I'll be honest, whenever you get your paperwork in, it's kind of like receiving something from the IRS. It's like, oh man, can we talk about this?
Yeah. Well, IRS, you can't even have a discussion, right?
That's been my experience.
But one thing that the PVTO, and look, obviously there's a lot of things with the PVTO bill I'm not a fan of. Okay, but right. One thing it kick off, and that has been refined over the years, is trying to get more transparency, because that's a taxing or a tax principle, right? Transparency. When you go to the grocery store or you go to the store, it's very transparent. 8.25. Yeah. I know what I'm into. Okay. I know what I was getting into when I got out of the truck, when I went in that store, and I know what I got into when I left. I got a receipt. It has my subtotal, and then it has 8.25, and it has my total. Yeah. Okay. And I can have my cell phone calculator, and I can be shopping, and I can be, computing at least a rough estimate of what I'm going to look out like when I get to the grocery line. Okay.
Sure.
So on the property taxes was more transparency, was to, late spring, early summer, is to mail appraisal notices to the taxpayers, the property taxpayers, that would say, hey, this is what your valuation is today.
Right.
It's upcoming taxing season. And because remember, the appraisal district doesn't levy a tax rate.
Okay.
Matter of fact, relying on tax revenues, okay, in order to do its function. So it doesn't levy a tax rate. But what the transparency laws say is that you should send this notice out to the taxpayers, and you should use last year's tax rate to give people sort of a window or a projection of what the new values based on the last year's tax rate will mean for their pocketbooks.
Okay.
So the process is meant to mobilize, or I guess another word, get people ramped up and probably angry when they look at that and say, oh no.
Yeah.
This is no. Heck no. I would say that's how the process was supposed to work.
Okay.
You wouldn't get the surprise later in the year or early next year when the tax assessor collector sends you the bill. You get the surprise now. And that's to mobilize taxpayers to, one, protest your value.
Right.
Okay. Which you can at no initial cost.
Right.
You can protest every year. Even if your stuff, if your values go down, you can still protest. Okay. To start talking with your local taxing entity, elected officials who do set the rate, and say, look, if my values are going up like this, you got to be looking at bringing that rate down. And I know we're going to probably get into this, as one of the reforms that were made in 2019 is to have taxing entities announce what is, to the taxpayers, a no new revenue tax rate. Meaning, what does the tax rate need to be not to bring in additional revenue from previous taxpayers?
Okay. So if there's a no new revenue tax, okay, then I guess my question would be the biggest tax that we actually have, or the biggest taxing entity that anyone has, is the school. And right. So would they actually have to, I guess my question is this: if we were going to gather up a group of 100 people or more and go to the appraisal district and sit down and say, okay, we want you guys to adopt the no new revenue tax, is that how that works?
No, that's not how that works. If you say go to the appraisal district is doing the values.
Okay.
You go to the taxing entities on the rate.
So we'd all have to carpool and get down there to the I guess commissioner's court, talk to them, go over and talk to the school. Would probably be the first place to start, right?
Yeah. Yes. And let me talk about let's talk about the dichotomies here, right? So your cities, your counties, for instance, they have what we call a 3.5% rollback rate. At one time, before 2019, that rollback rate was 8%.
Okay, so explain that, because to me, whenever I hear rollback, I just get caught up in the words.
Okay. So rollback rate means it's I would call it more like a taxpayer trigger. Okay. So this is the total revenue that any one taxing jurisdiction. Let's keep the school districts out of this for right now. Okay.
Okay.
They got a different scenario. All right.
Okay.
So
let's say like commissioner's court.
Okay. We start with our counties. Okay. They are at a 3.5% rollback rate. I call it more like a taxpayer trigger. Okay. We're hearing that term a lot, right? Saying that if they take in more than, I'm talking about total revenue, not revenue from anyone or any individual taxpayer, but if they take in more than 3.5% revenue from the previous year, they automatically trigger an election. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So you got to think like our elected officials, because on that election, it will say this is a tax increase. Okay. And we know in Texas, that's probably not usually that's not a good way to start a conversation, right?
Sure.
So we lowered it from 8% to 3.5% to allow that trigger to come up quicker. Okay. All right. So you've got that out there. Okay.
Okay. So when you say, not to cut you off, but when you say that will trigger, if it goes over 3.5, that's going to push toward an election. What does that mean?
That means the voters will go to the vote and say, do you want to adopt the tax rate that this entity has proposed in order for them to increase their revenue beyond 3.5% annually? Can I show you something real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's still up here. I may have to redo it. Let's see. Oh, I got to redo it. Okay. That's probably better. Right. Okay. So let's say that we had this fictional taxing entity. You could call it a city, you could call it a county. Okay. And let's say this fictional entity was 1 acre. And I'm using these terms, these terms and these numbers just to make it simple. Okay.
Just for example. Okay.
For example. So this whole city or county is 1 acre, and everybody lives on this 1 acre. Okay. All right. And the appraisal district for that county goes out and does their appraisal. And they say, okay, everybody. The valuation is $100 valuation. That's their appraisal for that 1 acre. Okay. And nobody wins their protest. Okay. So it's going to be $100 for that entire taxing entity. Now it's time to set the rate. Okay. Now it's time to set the rate. You know, maybe there's some citizen involvement. Maybe there's not a lot of citizen involvement. Who knows, right?
Right.
But the taxing entity sets that rate at $1 per $100 valuation.
Right.
Okay. Because that's usually how it works out, right? Okay. So now the tax assessor collector, they've got the values for everybody in the area. They've got the tax rate. He or she is ready to hit that button and send out the actual tax bills. So it's $1 per valuation, right? So that's going to be $100 valuation times $1. And that means the tax bill, the total revenue for the whole tax
whole fictional entity, right?
They're going to get $100. You know, that may be police, that may be water, whatever. Okay. Right. That they're supposed to be doing. So, and let's say that was in 2021. Okay. So guess what, homeboy? We got to do this thing again.
Okay.
And we're still dealing with this size, same taxing entity, right?
Right.
And what happens in 2022 now is what's going to happen to everybody. You get this appraisal notice, okay? And the appraisal notice this time is just like what's been happening to everybody I'm talking to, right? The valuation has increased. Let's just put this number here to 120. So everybody's getting their, oh gosh. Did your wages, did your salary at the plant increase by 20%? Because that's a 20% increase, right? Did your salary increase by 20%? Is your ad revenue on your talk show increasing 20%, Jay?
No.
Okay, it did. So everybody's saying no. I'm going to go protest. Okay, I'm going to go protest. So let's say again, okay, nobody wins their protest. Okay. So that means the value is going to stay at 120. But understand, because of the reforms that we did in 2019, that rollback rate or that taxpayer trigger rate, right, was 8%. We decreased it to what? 3.5%. So first of all, from all get up, when you look at it statutorily, if that entity sets a rate that brings in revenue, because 100 plus 5%, it's equal to 103.50, right? So if they set a rate that brings in more than $103.50, they're going to trigger that election.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what I would recommend, and what everybody is recommending, because this tax entity, because of the 2019 legislation, they will have to compute and identify a no new tax revenue rate. When it was at 8%, they called it, I think, the effective tax revenue rate. Okay.
Okay.
Now it's called the no new tax revenue rate. Okay. What does that rate need to be to bring in the same level of revenue as last year? Okay. From everybody in that taxing entity, all the revenue sent in, right? So This is how you compute that. So you go prior year tax rate, which was $1, right? Okay.
Right.
And the new or current value, which was what? 120. Okay. You divide 1 to 120 on your calculator. Okay. And you get 0.0083. Okay. Then you multiply that by 100, and that gives you the no new revenue tax rate, 0.83. And if you multiply 0.83 times 120, you will get 100.
So it just balances it out.
That's right. So the theory would be is, I don't mean $1. Let me get that way here. Okay. Okay. So that's $100. Okay. That's the same tax revenue rate as last year. No new revenue. Okay.
Right.
All right. So when folks may say, well, Rep, why aren't you out there saying something right now? You see these values. By God, I went to the Tyler County tax appraisal and your values went up. Well, there's a reason why, because we got a process. We got reforms that I voted for. Okay. Is it what I would have wanted totally? No. But, there's 150 people in the House and 31 in the Senate, right? And then you got a governor who can veto. Okay. So you got a lot of people that weigh in on this, right? First of all, this is the protest period, right? Okay. I don't do appraisal value protest. Okay. All right. Your taxing entities, they're going through their budget workshops, which are open to the public. And another reform we did, I don't know if it was in 2019 or earlier, I think all of these workshops, all of these meetings now, the county, the city, or whatever, they got to post those online. They can archive it on YouTube. I've seen them do it various ways. Okay. So if you're working at the plant, but you can't be there at 2:00, when you get home on the weekend, you can go see what new meeting did they have in Tyler County, or Jasper County, Polk, or Newton County. Okay. And you can watch it. Okay. I believe this may be the first year where these entities will send out a notice with the no new tax revenue rate. And there will be information on who you need to call to say, I think y'all need to adopt the no new tax revenue rate or something real close to it. And it doesn't mean you can't adopt one lower than the no new tax revenue rate. Okay. I do not sit on a county commissioner's court. I do not sit on a city council or any other local jurisdiction body. One reason I don't is because I haven't been elected to it. And two, I can't get elected to it because your state constitution doesn't allow me to hold two elected positions at one time. Okay. And nor do I have any desire to hold a local elected position in those, in those. Okay. So so well, why aren't you saying something right now? I said, now, when we get back into session, obviously I'm not going back to the House. I've decided not to run again, but I do think there will be some real good discussions because the resources are there where we can start adding additional money. And we need to talk about the school districts, additional money to the school districts where we can start buying down the maintenance and operational school property tax and hopefully one day get that down to zero. But I know we want to talk about the school district real quick, but.
Okay, so just specific on this. All right, specific question on this. If I'm looking at this, then my thought process is if we're looking at 2022 versus 2021, mm-hmm. and this no new tax revenue rate is in effect. In 2023, it's basically going to lock it at the $100 again, correct?
Good. Or higher or low, wherever the rate is, yeah.
Wherever the rate is, okay.
Right.
So it just provides a mechanism between the appraisal value and the actual tax rate.
Yeah. And yes, because understand, and I don't know if you'll be able to do it. I think I sent you maybe a 10 or 12. It was a very short video, right?
Yeah, no, it was a great video.
And it was by local elected officials. And they were extremely frank and they were extremely frank and honest. And they said, your appraisal district does not raise your taxes.
Right.
Or set your tax rate. Your local taxing entities do that. Please come to us and talk about what services you want, what level of services you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
All right. So I think, your protests, having constructive discussions with your local officials about what the rate should be, that's where we need to be right now. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. When the legislature gets back in, and it's not saying that I'm not talking to people about eliminating property taxes or transforming or reforming the tax code, but if you I used to be a football basketball coach, but it's like in the game, right? Okay. If we're lining up the kickoff, okay, we're lining off to do the kickoff right now. We're not lining up to do the field goal. I'm not on the sidelines talking about, okay, special teams. I know we're about to go out and do the kickoff, but look, let's talk about the field goal kick real quick. No, we're not talking about that now.
There's a process.
Right. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't have some ideas about how we're going to do the field goal kick.
Right.
Okay. But that's going to be at the time when the touchdown has been made. Now we got to do the point after kick. Okay, y'all get over here. Let's kick. So right now, this is where we are. We are with the protests and the tax rate. All right. Okay. Now, let me add on that. Just because an entity stays at the no new revenue tax rate, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're not bringing in, they will bring in additional revenue above the no new revenue tax rate. And let me tell you why. What the legislature did is new value that comes on during that last previous tax year, the new value for that tax year that comes on, we do not, we don't count that against the taxing entity. So for example, let's say Jasper, for instance, let's say that during 2022, you got a 1,000 home residential area that came into existence. All 1,000 homes were sold, and all those taxpayers were paying property taxes, right? That won't count against their no new revenue tax rate, that additional revenue. So you can still set a no new revenue tax rate and still be getting more revenue than you did the previous year, because we don't count the new valuation against you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting part is with what you're saying, you basically said a minute ago that you don't believe that the votes are there for eliminate property tax to really have a foothold.
It takes a 2/3 in both chambers. It is tough getting a constitutional amendment to the voters.
Wow. So really, so you're not saying, I mean, because, you said earlier on, you said, to say it's not possible would be defying history, but at the same time, we got to start where we're at.
Right. And here's the thing about this. We can work on both at the same time, right? Because, and let's talk about the school districts a little bit, okay? Because the school districts are at a hard cap.
Okay.
Okay. At least in this situation with counties and cities, if the people want a tax that brings in more than 3.5%, they can vote and get it. They can say yes. Okay. School districts are at a hard 2.5% cap.
Okay.
But here's the difference is the school districts compared to the other entities, they do get some state revenue.
Okay.
So they're at a 2.5% hard revenue cap. Okay. But remember, let me see, how do I do this? Boom. Okay, I found out. All right. With school districts, okay, they got a hard cap, 2.5%. Okay. But here's another thing. When you look at your school property tax bill, because on your property tax bill, you'll have county, you have city, you may have, ESD, some places like over in Tyler County, there's a hospital, but then you've got ISDs. Okay.
Right.
Or maybe ISDs. If your property is large enough, you may be in 2 districts. Okay. Your school property tax bill is M&O. That's short for maintenance and operation, and INS, interest and sinking. Okay. M&O, that's the day-to-day costs for your school districts.
Okay.
That's the day-to-day costs. All right. Salaries, whiteboard markers, whatever it takes to keep the lights on during the school.
Gotcha.
Your interest in sinking or your capital projects, better known as buildings, stadiums. Okay. And those come in the form of bonds, right?
Okay.
Okay. Guess what, brother? This right here is subject to a bond election. Okay. And if you go to a bond election and you look at your ballot, I believe somewhere on that ballot, you will see the phrase, this is a tax increase. Okay. So because I run into this from time to time, that because of the reforms we did in school finance, we're sending more monies to the school district to kind of mitigate the increase in values. Okay. And it's forcing their maintenance and operation tax to go down. The more tax revenue, more sales tax revenue, state revenue you get for schools, to schools, drives down the maintenance and operation rate. Okay. But, and I'm saying this not from an opinionated standpoint, but what happens. But if the people in a district, the voters in a district vote to approve a bond election, you are raising taxes on yourself. And that increase in taxes may balance off, may erase whatever tax rate decrease I send down on maintenance and operation. But understand, you vote for that.
Yeah.
Or you don't vote it for that. Okay.
Sure.
So you vote. So, I mean, that's not a criticism. It just is what it is. So when people say, I don't understand, Rep, my taxes went up. Well, I'll sit down with them. Do you remember? You don't have to tell me how you voted. It's your business. I mean, because from time to time, you just need to fix stuff. You need to build stuff. I get it. Right. But if you had a bond election, or you have an INS tax rate that's lingering out there, okay, that's voter approved tax increase.
Yeah, it is. It is crazy because if you think about most of the counties have a number of ISDs that have recently passed bonds in the last 10 to 15 years. And, from everything from, stadiums and buildings to, I don't know. I mean, it's just a lot, but that right there is basically. So if we, at some point we could potentially do away with the 2.5 or reduce it.
Well, the M&O.
On the M&O. Yeah. The 2.5, that 2.5 is that specific to M&O?
It's specific. Yes, that's right.
Okay. So you're basically saying that there's a potential of being able to reduce that, but we're still dealing with these bonds that we're all voting for.
And that's all voter approved. The rep is definitely out of that.
Gotcha.
I'm definitely out of it. Now, there are some regulations, some state regulations around it. Okay.
Right.
But at the end of the day, that's voter approved.
So I sat down and spoke to Jasper County Tax Assessor Collector Bobby Biscamp here recently, and there was a statement that was brought up about basically taking a third, breaking, just digging into how this appraisal system works. Okay, and just basically from what I recall of the conversation. There's roughly 40,000+ entities, or not entities, 40,000+ accounts in the county of Jasper. And they basically, what was told to me was that at one point they were allowed to break that up into thirds and try to do appraisals on 1/3 this year, another third next year, the final third, and then start it back over. Now, is that accurate? I mean, is that accurate information?
That's accurate information. That's statutory, but the state tax code gives appraisal districts a few methodologies to do that. Okay. I think one that's used quite commonly and regularly is the mass appraisal system, where, and look, one thing that has to be done by every appraisal board district, right, is, and this should be online or at least subject to the public, disclosure. They must identify their appraisal process.
Okay.
That must be you just can't make it up as you go.
Sure.
Up as you go, or there may be something that be made up that you don't like, but they must come up with a process. Okay. And understand who makes up your appraisal board. those members are chosen by the leaders of the taxing entities.
Okay.
Nobody asked me, hey, should Jay be on the appraisal board? Nobody asked me that as a state legislator, and nor should they ask me that. Okay.
Right.
And I have not asked to be asked. Okay. One is the mass appraisal system, where they will look at, for the most part, a sample of properties in different classes, different types, and come up with some type of maybe per square footage or, based on maybe what type of income it produces. And then they come out with a value.
Okay.
But again, this is why you protest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's basically, I mean, that's one of the things that's actually kind of the eye-opening thing for me, is that the system is set up in such a way to where that protest is as relevant as receiving your appraisal documentation.
Yes.
From the appraisal district.
And again, I think that protest is on the back of that appraisal value. So we want to make it real easy.
Yeah.
Well, while you're understandably, while you're concerned, while you're fuming, whatever, you turn that thing, you say, yes, I want to protest, and you send that in.
Yeah. Okay. So
we would encourage everyone to always ask questions of their government. And filing a protest is a way of asking a question. At the least, clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. So from an appraisal district, okay, so now we've evolved from the schools doing their appraisals, the county doing their appraisals, the ESDs and hospital districts doing their appraisals. It's evolved over to this process based on the Pivotal bill, where you have a centralized location of appraisals per county, correct? Am I clear to that point?
Yes. Valuations, yes.
Okay. So at that point, now who are the governing bodies? Who governs the appraisal district? Because I'll be honest with you, when there's a dispute, you can go directly to them. But what happens if you don't feel like your issue is resolved? What's kind of the next step?
Well, you always have the tax rate that you can lobby your local officials on, right? Okay. You always have the tax. And it's interesting you bring up this question because folks will come and tell me how, they think the appraisal board is not doing something appropriate. And, look, I'm how a bill becomes a law, right? Remember those little cartoons, okay? You have three branches of government: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. The executive enforces the law. Okay. Judicial interprets what the law means. The legislature makes the law.
Okay.
So that someone comes to me and says, well, Rep, I think something's going on corrupt down there. Well, if you tell me corrupt, that gets into the criminal aspect, I guess. Okay. And this is not to sound arrogant or flippant, but if you think there is a crime, you call the police.
Okay.
I'm a legislature. I make the law.
Right.
I mean, we say we don't want tyranny. We don't want one branch. We've had problems at time to time nationally with the federal judiciary, to the extent that we think they're not interpreting, they're actually legislating from the bench. Okay. Right. Well, the legislature, as a legislator, I don't need to enforce the law from the bench. Okay. Or from my legislative position. Okay. So to the extent that you think something, you need to go to the police or the appropriate agency in the executive branch that has oversight of that function. And this is anything. Okay. From time to time, for good reasons. Someone will tell me, Rep, could you help us out? My daughter's been missing for 2 weeks. My first question is, have you called the police?
Right.
And what are the police doing? Okay.
Sure.
Now they may say, okay, Rep, we've called. If you see the sheriff, could you just mention my daughter's name to him? Not a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
But, you call the police. All right. Now, in statute, your taxing entities determine who sits on the appraisal board, which is the governing body of the appraisal district.
Okay.
And the appraisal board will go out and hire a chief appraiser to do the day-to-day stuff. The appraisal board comes in and meets every week or so. All right. And, small towns, small counties, we may know these people that are on the appraisal board. Okay. Right. To the extent that you don't think your appraisal district is being governed properly or that is being governed exceptionally, you can communicate that to your appraisal board.
Okay.
All right. Now, when it comes to your appraisal protest, there's another body that will handle that. And it's called the appraisal review board. Okay. All right. And they hear the protests that have been filed. Okay. It's they make, they can say yes, they can say no, they can negotiate, they can do whatever. Okay. And then there's even a process beyond there where you can challenge even the appraisal review board's decision, either in court or in mediation. And there is a cost to that. And if you do win that, you can get your money back. Okay. Yeah, right. So, and here's another thing. And look, obviously I co-authored, joint authored the provisions that came up with the changes in 2019. Okay. That went in the direction to the taxpayer, right?
Okay.
Favor. I filed legislation where we could, matter of fact, I think I was the first one that actually, I think it was back in 2017, and I did the math, and I said, look, if we raised the sales tax 1 penny, I think back then it was like 3 to 5 billion. Now I think it's about 6 or 7 billion of tax revenue. That if you dedicated that 1 cent to the statewide school maintenance and operation, that decreases your M&O rate by like, I think it was like 35%. It was a real big number, right? I mean, where you could really feel relief, so to speak. Okay. So I would credit myself as one to kind of get that discussion. They got that discussion started, that the school tax is the largest part, and the largest part of the school tax is the maintenance and operation. And if the state, and that is one part of the property tax system that I can directly impact, because there's already legislation in place right now that the more money that I fund schools with, Jay, that decreases the maintenance and operation. All right. So I tell my friends, though, in these other situations like cities and counties, part of staying in tune with the people, okay, is to, I just listen at what other people are talking about in their campaign. I may have to go to a political forum during the election period, and I'll sit and listen to some of the discussions they're having with their county, county commissioner's race or city council race or mayor's race. And again, this is an observation, not a criticism. Very rarely do tax rates and appraisal board activities come up as a central discussion in those races. And those are actually the people that can lower the rate and actually put them on the appraisal board.
Gotcha.
Okay. So not to say that I don't stop working on good tax policy, but it is to say that if we do have these concerns, maybe some of these other people, these discussions should be happening with them as well.
I got you. So specific to holding the appraisal board accountable, you talked about that, like the steps that the citizen has. But I mean, is there anything governing? Because I mean, from what I'm understanding, there's some audits and things like that happen.
Yes.
To try to keep the appraisal district, I guess you would just say, honest in a way.
Well, we would always say the ultimate oversight are the voters.
Okay.
We want we want an appraisal board that's going to be looking after the taxpayer. Well, school districts, other local entities, they put people on the appraisal board. Maybe that's what if I'm running for school board or county commissioner and I come knock on your door for your vote, maybe that's one thing you bring up. Hey, when it comes time to put people on that appraisal board, you get people on that appraisal board that are pro-taxpayer. Okay. All right.
Right.
But yes, the state comptroller is charged in statute with doing audits where they really go through and look at the operation, not necessarily how much the values are increasing. Okay. Because again, we say your appraisal district is a hard stop on the appraisal values. It's nearly a hard stop. Okay. Other than for protest or potential mediations that may impact the valuation, that appraisal office, that valuation, it's pretty much a hard stop. Okay. There's some other provisions in there, Jay, like on your residential, your homestead, that valuation for tax purposes cannot increase more than 20% in any given year for taxable purposes. So the valuation can go up 50%, but for your taxable value, it can only increase 10%. Okay. So that's why sometimes what you'll see is, you'll see appraised value.
Right.
I don't know what's wrong with me spelling this morning. I think I'm moving too fast. So you'll have appraised value. Okay. Whatever methodology the appraisal district used to come up with your value, then let's say your appraised value is 100. Let's say your appraised value for 2021 was $100,000.
Right.
And that's, when you moved into your new homestead, that's what the appraised value was. Okay. Then in 2022, let's say that appraised value increased to $200,000. Okay. That's a 100% increase, right?
Sure.
Okay. But for taxable purposes, you can only be taxed on appraised value of $110,000.
Okay.
So you'll see this here, and you should probably still protest, right?
Right.
Okay. But this is where you'll be.
Okay. So here's my question then. So if that's the case, then now let's add in what the say this property here, you guys made a change. You went from 25,000 on homestead to 40,000. How does that affect this model here?
And that's only, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that the voters voted on successfully a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. So for school tax purposes, I believe the homestead exemption the homestead exemption was 25,000.
Okay.
On school
so basically
taxes.
that 20 on school taxes?
Only on school taxes. It was about school taxes. You, the voters, went out and increased that 40,000. Okay. So that's where you start on your taxable value. And when it comes to your school property taxes, they're going to subtract 40,000. Okay. I think that brings you to 70, right?
I think so.
Okay. Yes, for school tax purposes, that's where you're going to be when they compute times the tax rate.
Okay. Times whatever the tax rate is, which at a school, is it the 2.5? Is that it plus whatever bonds?
Well, let's just say this. The 2.5, that just caps on revenue. Okay. So when I say your ISD rate, that's going to be your M&O plus your INS.
Okay.
All right. And that's going to be your total rate times 70,000. So if you got
it. All right. So let me see if I'm clear on this. Okay. Not trying to cut you off, man, but the M&O is just capped at 2.5. It could be on the revenue. Okay. It could be 1.3. It could be anything below that. It's just capped at that 2.5
on additional revenue. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So you're so brother, you got M&O plus your INS if you got a bond out there.
Yeah.
So you could probably have an M&O of maybe 90 cents. You can probably have an INS of 35 cents. Okay. A total tax rate for your ISD at 125. And then you multiply that times 70,000, right? And it's valuation per 100,000, 70,000 times 125. That's your rate. I mean, that's your tax bill for the school.
From the school. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So that 40,000 applies to school.
School only.
Okay. But I mean, that's the biggest. So I mean, it matters. It's normally the biggest.
Some other jurisdictions do have a discretion to do a homestead exemption, but that's really up to them.
Sure. Okay.
Now, we should not forget this, since I know you a lot of people will look at this. A lot of people call it the 65 and over freeze. Okay. Right. So when you're at 65, only on your homestead, you can get this. You can get this 65 plus freeze that technically freezes your property taxes on the school. Okay. Freezes your school property tax at where it is at 65 plus. When you pay. Now, let me also say this, because the voters approved this also. Because of the decreases in the M&O over the last few years, because of what we did in 2019, right?
Right.
There are situations that we found out where some of our seniors, at the rate that they were frozen at, is actually higher than the current M&O rate. Okay. So a constitutional amendment was passed where now those seniors can get their freeze readjusted to that low M&O rate and then frozen again.
Okay. So, let me ask you this, and just your opinion on this, because I mean, I think I'm kind of trying to ask everybody on some level what their thoughts are about what would be your opinion about taking a person who's 65 years old or older and completely removing the sales tax or the school tax for 65 and over. I mean, what's your opinion on that? And I'm not talking legislation and all that stuff. I'm just asking what's your opinion. Instead of a freeze, what's your thought about just removing it completely?
Well, thank you for that question. Article 7, Section 1 gives the legislature the responsibility of making sure that there is a system for a free public school system. Okay. All right. Obviously, it's not free, but free to the extent at the point that you're using that service.
Right.
All right. And I've had a lot of discussions about that as by being in the legislature. And I think one thing we got to look at is as a senior, and I think you and I will be one pretty soon here.
Sure.
Okay. We still benefit from having an educated populace.
Absolutely.
Obviously, as a senior, you need medical care more than you need it now. Obviously, as a senior, so you still need government services.
No doubt.
Okay, you still need an educated populace, and you need qualified doctors. You need to make sure you got great engineers that when they build a bridge, the damn thing doesn't fall down.
Right.
So I would say I understand the utility is probably less 65 and older. Now, you can still have people 65 and older and still have children.
Well, there's no doubt about that. I understand.
Still have children in the household. Okay. So I would just say continuing to buy the M&O rate down. Philosophically, I think, because again, remember on the INS, if there's a bond election,
right,
that seniors, that bond election doesn't impact the senior, right? Because
the bonds don't affect the seniors
at time because they're frozen when they're frozen.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So anything after that, they're frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. So saying that, philosophically, I have always thought, okay, that the legislature should fund the entire maintenance and operation throughout the state.
Okay.
Because I think that's consistent with the state constitution. The legislature shall provide. Okay. All right. So that's why I keep getting back. If I really want to help that senior today, because they're frozen, they won't be in by INS going forward.
Sure.
Is the M&O rate down. Right. And now to this new constitutional amendment that's passed, they will benefit from that decrease in the rate.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I think that's where we need to go.
That's the first step. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Or, if Daniel Miller and them have their way, they're talking about removing property tax once the session happens. So, you never know.
About this, as a senior, maybe even more. There's a, requirement for, certain services, right? Okay.
Right.
And like I say, certain other, I don't have them memorized off the top of my head, but other jurisdictions do have a discretion. Sometimes it may be 5,000 or 10,000. They do have a discretion to implement an exemption as well.
Okay. Well, that's good information because, to me, I think the three groups that need to be looked at, obviously seniors 65 and older, disabled, and military vets. To me, it just seems like a military vet, he's done his work. You know what I'm saying?
And we have provisions for those if they are 100% disabled or whatever percent disabled, that will apply to their value, their actual value.
Right.
So we have, if they're disabled, but you're right, especially when it comes to our disabled and our seniors, they start getting into that fixed income range.
Yeah.
Or disabled vet, maybe no income range, right?
Right.
And so providing those considerations.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to put out here to the public, just specific on this property tax point, and kind of drive this thing home? Because I mean, to me, I my attempt, although sometimes is not stellar, is to try to provide an atmosphere for people who are obviously smarter than me on these topics to communicate and express maybe some data we don't, the populace doesn't have out here, or maybe they're just not. I mean, like myself, I mean, here's the thing. I've got no excuse for not understanding property tax outside of the fact that, to be honest with you, I'm lazy. And what I try to do is when the property tax comes, or the appraisal comes in, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to do some comps myself, just on in a basic way. And for myself, even, whenever we were starting to fill out the protest, I went on and started looking at the comps, and I'm sitting here going, man, I think I'm just going to cut the check, and hopefully they don't look at my stuff for another year. so because I mean, the comparables in my place, I'm sitting here going, so what I'm saying is this hasn't been a deep dive for me. This has just been trying to look at this from a standpoint of what's practical, what's rational. And, if there are disputes, if there is corruption, I mean, because as well as I do, man, I mean, this is Southeast Texas. I mean, this place, if you do any historical study, this place was considered kind of a no man's land across this Sabine River, where a lot of people would flee. And we'll just say most of us are probably descendants of some of those folks. So corruption's been known for years in these parts. At the same time, maybe it's just as simple as just filing your protests and going through the dispute process, but it may even go on to getting some of the governing bodies in the mix as well, because like you made the statement there about bringing the police in, I mean, that wouldn't have dawned on me. I would have just went online and tried to find whoever's governing over the appraisal district. And
you could start there, and just by asking a question, hey, this doesn't look right. And
right.
I'm going to just tell you, obviously we represent 5 counties in this part of Southeast Texas,
right.
And Sabine River, right? But usually when I get an inquiry, especially when it's something specific, rep, appraisal district said this, and, really my house is only 900 square feet, but they're saying it's 920 square feet, which is real money on the valuation, right?
Sure.
If it's a massive process. We'll just send them over to the appraisal chief.
Yeah.
And usually in my business, if I don't get a call back,
yeah,
it usually means it's been rectified.
Sure.
Okay. Only get a call back if it didn't go their way, right?
Right.
And send that over to the appraisal chief and say, hey, will you take a look? They're saying that they have this amount of square footage and maybe your records have this. People do make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is why you get the appraisal notice with all of that information on it, so you can look at it. Look, Jay, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you why I think this issue is so emotional. Is one, we do highly believe life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that I have a God-given right to pursue economic happiness.
Sure.
And especially in the United States, that means owning, possessing, selling, property.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so, yes, we do believe that this, because the old saying, the power of the tax is the power to destroy. You've heard of that, right? Yeah. So to the extent that you're taxing what I believe is an inalienable right, you're destroying it.
Exactly.
Okay? For the greater good, maybe. Okay, but it's still destroying it. So that's why it's emotion. Here's another reason why it's emotion. It is probably the one tax, the one last tax that everybody sits at the dinner table or wherever you sit, and you personally write that check and get in your truck and either hand it, pay it at the tax assessor collector's office or put it in the drop box. If you think about all the other taxes, for the most part, they have some type of front end deduction, right? Yeah. And sometime the following year you settle up. Either you pay a little bit more or you get something back. But right. This is one tax still, or the sales tax. The sales, you do that, and you look at the receipt, maybe you don't. But this is the one where you sit down and you get that black pen, a blue pen out, and you write that number in.
Yeah, it's still very much in an invoice type of situation instead of an out of sight, out of mind.
Hey, it's still very personal.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, the complaint has been, and I'll be honest with you, I feel the same exact way on this point. But, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, one of the keys to that is if I've sat here and I've worked my ass off for 65 or 70 years, and I've amassed, 15, 20, 50 acres, 100 acres, and then I die and it goes to my kids, and now they're strapped and struggling with an economy that is like it is now, and the wages haven't went up, okay? And all of the prices of everything has went up. So now we take that, we take that world, and then we throw these taxes on top of it that has a very real, I'm going to come get your stuff if you don't pay this bill type of profile.
And that's another thing. We know that all taxes, come with the coercion, right? I mean, that's the whole part of it, right? I mean,
say that last part again.
Coercion of government.
Exactly. Yeah, because I mean, in the long run, it's basically, and I don't mean this personal, but just in a real way, it feels very much like this is an invoice from the devil.
Okay, and I've heard that. So, but this is what we do know. Whether it's the state sales tax,
right?
Whether it's the state oil and gas severance tax, where it's the state fuel tax, whether it's the state franchise tax, where it's the property tax.
Yeah.
And let me say this. We're all individual opportunity maximizers. Okay? Let's just put it down. We all naturally want more than we're really willing to pay for, right? I mean, you can experiment that when you go to the grocery store,
Right.
I want that gallon or half gallon, whatever it is. I usually just buy it by the pints of pistachio almond ice cream.
Right.
You got to make a decision. I want it, but do I need it? And am I willing to pay the delta between that to get it? Okay. So, and that's the same thing with government services. We all want our road paved.
Right.
We do. Okay.
Yeah.
We all want the fire department to show up as I am hitting dial on my cell phone.
Sure.
We all want to be able to drive around our area and see our black and whites and see our law enforcement doing their job. So we're all individual maximizers. Okay. And I'm saying that to the extent that, and this is why it's important to have these discussions when it comes to the property taxes. Obviously, I have these discussions with taxpayers when it's dealing with state revenues. Okay.
Sure.
In the back of my mind, I'll know people are probably asking for more than they really want.
Right.
Okay. All right. So do you really want it? Do you really need it? Okay.
Yeah.
So you want it, or are you willing to pay this amount to get it?
Right.
And so I guess I'm going in circles to say this. Apparently, some elected official is listening to somebody, maybe like a lot of people, right?
Right.
To set these rates in order to deliver the services that's required of them.
Right. By the
maybe
people.
And let me just say this. There are some indirect costs that are imposed on local entities by state and federal government that are transferred over to the taxpayer directly, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there's certain standards in your jail, okay,
yeah,
that are imposed from the state indirectly or maybe directly that have a direct cost and impact to taxpayers locally. All right. So, so I just say that is, being fair to all elected officials. Apparently, they're providing something with these taxes that people have asked for.
Yeah.
And this is why it kind of kicks off, talking about kickoffs, it kicks off with the appraisal notice. Okay. This is how much you're going to buy or you're going to pay for your services. Do you want to pay for that based on last year's tax rate and this year's valuation? The answer may be no. The answer may be yes. Whatever the answer is, you need to have that discussion, not just at the protest with your evaluation.
Right.
Because a lot of people will go into the protest talking about their tax rate, and statutorily and appropriately, the appraisal review board members have to say, I hear you on the taxes. They are high. Matter of fact, I'm paying high taxes too, but I can't make a call on your tax rate. I can only make a call on your value.
Sure.
And you may lose your protest. Okay. Because you talk about the wrong thing. Okay.
Gotcha.
But when it comes to your rate, that's definitely a discussion. And we watch these things. I watch these things. And I think this year is going to be really interesting to see how many jurisdictions, not only in my district, throughout the state, how many of them adopt the no new revenue tax rate. And let me tell you why. Because, those things that you're talking about, the price of eggs, the price of bread, the price of milk, that's impacting you and your family, Jay. It's impacting impacting the families looking at this YouTube or this Zoom. But let me tell you who else it's impacting. That guy that's on the road crew with your county commissioner.
Yeah.
There's no separate line for them to go get their eggs at a cheaper price.
Right.
And, our taxing jurisdictions, or they're going to be saying, hey, we can't adopt the no new revenue tax rate. We may need to go up a little higher in order to maybe give our folks, a raise. So it's going to be really interesting. And this is why the folks need to be engaged in these discussions.
So, okay. So let me ask you this, like I said before, I'm not trying to cut you off in your process, but to me, is it just as simple as rallying the troops and having some education or making sure everyone is educated as far as the no new revenue tax rate and going down?
That's where it needs to start, bro. Yeah.
Okay. So at that point, the education first and then action, because that was one of the big concerns or big thoughts that I have, because coming from oil and gas, when you have these big gatherings and think tanks and stuff like this, the very last thing we start doing is we move over into actionable items. And actionable items are, out of this conversation that we've had here today, these are the list of 3 to 5 things that are actionable that we're going to move on today in order to push the ball further down the field.
1, you look at your appraisal notice and you ask, is it right? Do you think it's right?
Okay.
If not, yes. Okay. Because usually what's going to happen when folks call me, Rep, I don't understand these values. They're going up. Well, you know what? You live in Hardin County and I don't understand either. We can start trying to find that answer, but I think right now you need to protest. Okay. Next is, as they confirm the valuations for these jurisdictions, what is the no new revenue tax rate? Mr. Judge, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Whoever, that's where we need to start.
Okay.
State representative. I'm hearing every month that we are well ahead of our sales tax revenue projections. Mr. State Rep, I don't know if you can eliminate all the M&O or property taxes this year. I don't know if you have the votes, but you should have the votes to compress, that's what we call it, compress or reduce these M&O tax rates for these school districts. Okay, so there's a piece here everywhere, okay, to make sure that people are engaged, right? So I'm not saying here's another one. Rep, you need to go up there in this session, you need to make sure you vote on no unfunded mandates. If you think my county and my city needs to do it, by God, you have a discussion with me as a state taxpayer and you pay for it out of the state revenues. Okay. Don't pass something and then shove it down on the counties and say, hey, I did something. I'm a hero.
Sure.
But then the county commissioner's court has to come up with the money for it. So this is why I've had to tell and had to explain to a lot of folks, take mental health, for instance. Okay. That is probably one of the biggest drivers in your criminal justice budget. Okay.
Yeah.
In the state. De facto. It is a de facto, like a fact. And at the same time, it is a damn shame, Jay.
Yeah.
Your county jails in Jasper, Polk, Tyler, Jasper, all over the state have de facto become the mental health hospitals of first and maybe last resort in our state.
It's crazy.
Okay. So I've had to tell folks where I have voted for state tax revenues to go to increase mental health funding. Okay. The reason for that is because I want to provide opportunities to decrease, may not be able to eliminate, but to decrease, mitigate, lessen the impact on the local counties.
Right.
Okay. When your sheriff says that he has someone so mentally ill in his jail, okay, I can just make up a whole lot of things, okay, that he cannot even fathom keeping them in his jail, and he has no bed to send them to.
Yeah.
Who's paying for those meds? Who's paying for that extra observation? Make sure he or she in the jail doesn't hang themselves, okay, right, or bite their toe off, which is not something to think can't happen.
Right.
So maybe I've gotten a call about that before.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right. Okay. Then therefore, if he can't find a bed if your county can't afford it, they're doing all those costs.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's what we have to understand is, you know, there's some cost out there. Okay. And in many instances, I think, like our schools, that was one reason I was highly supportive of the school finance reforms in 2019, because there was an imbalance where in too many instances, school finance was being shifted to the property taxpayers. Okay. In a disproportionate way. All right. So I think it's possible for the state, and we do it, to stay below its budget caps, its constitutional spending limits.
Right.
While at the same time not transferring costs to the local entities so they can stay under their limitations, 3.5%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Right.
So we all got to be working together, and the taxpayers back here at home should be talking to all of us. So someone says, well, James, you ought to be having a meeting right now. Well, I get that. Okay. We can have those meetings, and we do. But first, I'm not appraisal chief. I'm not on the appraisal review board. Okay.
Right.
Protests. Okay. And again, as those and I hope that video I sent you, it can be attached to this.
Yeah, I'll put that in there.
Right. It's the rate. The rate plays a factor too.
Yeah.
Okay. Rate plays a factor too. So if you ask me, to kind of wrap it up, protest if you believe you have to. Start having discussions with your local entities on what is your expectation for services.
Sure.
Let me give you a real quick story. A few years ago, I got a call from a guy in the district, and he said he just had this big old hole in his road. It was a county road. It's this huge hole. That's how he explained it. I never went out and looked at it. I just took his word for it. If he's calling me, I got to take his word for it, right? And I said, well, it's a county road. And, initially the primary responsibility for county roads is the county. That's why it's called county road. State highways.
Sure.
State.
Yeah.
U.S. interstate. U.S. Okay.
Right.
And we talked about it. I said, well, have you talked to your commissioner about it? And he didn't really answer. Okay. I said, well, look, I got an idea of where your commissioners are as far as their revenue potential, what they have for roads, right? So I said, sometimes people will sit down with their commissioner and say, hey, look, is there some additional that we need to pay in order for, you to come out and, help us out with this? So have you had those discussions? He didn't really answer the question. And I think we finally got around to this last question. Would you be willing, if your commissioner said he would need more, would you be willing to pay more? And this is what the gentleman told me. He said, no. I did not. I didn't look at that as something. I didn't criticize him for that, Jay. Maybe he's not in a financial position to pay more.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So what I told him, I said, I understand. Okay. You continue to talk to your county commissioner. And what I will continue working on, and I did, and from time to time we've done this, where there are additional revenues from the oil and gas severance tax and these big, huge trucks, are pounding these county roads, I will always vote to set aside monies for local entities to draw down from to the work on roads that have had a lot of big truck traffic. I said, I'll do my part. Okay. So that goes back to my point is having those discussions and you say, you know, I don't like the way my road is right now.
Sure.
But I really like, I like more the idea of having a no new revenue tax rate right now because of some other challenges that I'm having fiscally. Yeah. And Mr. Commissioner, maybe we can delay the road now just as long as I don't get stuck in it. Okay. Can you work toward that no new revenue tax rate? Those are discussions that need to be happening locally.
Gotcha. That's the wagons we need to be circling.
Right.
Okay.
Right. If you got some other problems, there are state agencies, and call the police.
Sure. Okay.
That's what I tell on election fraud. I do think election fraud occurs. I do think there was some in the 2020 election. But that's going to be a criminal justice issue. Sure. That will be solved, you know, going forward. Are there some things that I did in order to have more election integrity? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, big dog, when you see election fraud, call the police.
Yeah. I get it. 100%.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Not on the Payroll. We've been sitting here dissecting the best we can the ins and outs of property tax. And really, the overarching point is we need to be having more conversations here locally together and then going to our taxing entities and having conversations with them as well. That's kind of the overarching point. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Okay. At this point.
At this point.
Right.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's the ball we can move down the field. You know, because to me, I'm all about eliminating property tax if it makes sense and it's reasonable. Mm-hmm. But that's going to take that 2/3 majority, right? But right now, in the meantime, we can move this ball down the field to getting some temporary relief while we're trying to find the permanent relief in the long run.
Absolutely.
James, I really appreciate you taking this time, man. It's a Saturday, and I do appreciate you taking some of this morning to kind of break some of this down. Any final words you want to say to the people?
Hey, look, stay engaged, stay encouraged. These are I don't know how tough they are, but they are interesting times in our country. But I think it you know, sometimes in the darkest moments, it doesn't seem that way. But I think generally the people are winning and can win. And what do I mean? Chip Roy put it real, you know, I think he really explained it really good at the Republican convention in Houston, the Texas Republican Convention. It is preserving freedom.
Right.
And that's really talked about. How do we preserve this freedom, not only for ourselves, but for our children? And what is part of this freedom? Pursuit of happiness, owning property, economic freedom. This is what we're talking about.
Right.
Okay. And so this is why this is emotional. We are extremely grateful to the people that are in this discussion, whether it's from eliminate property tax, whether it's from reforming the appraisal districts. We need that discussion. And I'm grateful for those folks. Okay. But you've been to Austin, you know, it's the legislature. Okay. And there's not going to be one individual legislator.
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be a combination. And we know what the votes are on a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Because from the legislature. And we know the challenges that they have in their jurisdiction. But and especially for us in rural Texas, these values really hit hard, right? Okay. Yeah. So we're going to continue putting in more money to these schools to bring down that M&O tax rate. We're going to continue finding ways to simplify state tax code with going to something simpler, like maybe a sales tax, some type of consumption tax, broadening that sales tax where there's maybe some items or services that weren't around when we instituted the sales tax that are now around, and now they need to be subject to the sales tax.
Sure.
Okay. So I've seen models, Jay, where a lower sales tax broadening the base and a lower sales tax could also generate more of the funds that we need for state services and maybe for local service. But look, we'll continue to work through that.
Absolutely, man. Once again, I appreciate you, man. Appreciate your time, buddy.
All right.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.